Tonight we'll drift through the centuries, beginning in the windswept steppes and highlands of ancient Iran, where the Persians emerged as a powerful force in the ancient Near East. We'll walk beside kings and poets, soldiers and priests, artisans and astronomers. You'll hear the distant hum of chariots on royal roads and the soft whisper of reeds beside the Euphrates. All of this, in the gentle company of a story that has waited patiently for thousands of years to be told once more. As we begin, picture yourself standing beneath a starlit sky in the Zagros Mountains. The cool air carries the scent of myrrh and cedar, and far below, a fire flickers in a nomadic camp. These highlands are the ancestral home of the Persian Indo-European people, whose language and customs descended from ancient Aryan tribes who once roamed Central Asia. They were not yet conquerors, not yet emperors, but they were watchful, and they listened to the earth. In the 6th century BCE, something stirred. A young leader named Cyrus, born into the Achaemenid dynasty, would rise not merely as a warrior, but as a unifier. His story rooted in legend and recorded in clay marks the true dawn of the Persian Empire. Through diplomacy, military genius, and an uncanny sense of timing, Cyrus would create the largest empire the world had yet seen, stretching from the Indus River in the east to the shores of the Aegean Sea in the west. But this empire was not only measured in miles, it was measured in ideas, religious tolerance, infrastructure on a grand scale, roads that stitched together distant peoples, a postal system, a bureaucracy, monumental art and architecture, law codes. The Persians didn't just conquer, they wove. They wove civilizations together. You may have heard of Persepolis, the ceremonial capitala place where giant stone bulls stood guard over intricate halls of stone and where emissaries from every corner of the empire brought gifts to their king. You may know the names of Darius, the king who organized the empire into satrapies or Xerxes, whose clashes with the Greeks echo in Herodotus and Hollywood alike. But beyond the battles and palaces lies something more enduring. The Persian vision of order, known as a Shah principle of truth, balance, and harmony in the world. Throughout this story, we will return often to that concept. Asha wasn't just a religious ideal, it was a way of thinking about civilization. The king was not merely a ruler, he was a keeper of cosmic order. To govern well was to reflect the harmony of the heavens. Tonight's journey will be gentle but full of discovery. We'll explore the rise of the Achaemenids, the grandeur of their imperial structure, the conquests and achievements of Darius the Great, the famous Greco-Persian Wars, and the eventual decline of the empire under internal stress and the arrival of Alexander the Great. But we will also pause to appreciate daily life, what it was like to be a merchant in Susa, a priest in Pasargadae, or a gardener in the royal parks of Persepolis. This isn't just a tale of kings and wars, it is a lullaby of civilization. As we drift from one chapter to the next, you'll hear of Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion that shaped ideas of good and evil, heaven and hell. You'll learn how the Persians managed one of the most diverse populations in history, and how their innovations quietly passed into the hands of their successors, from the Greeks to the Romans, from the Islamic caliphates to modern notions of empire and diplomacy. And all of this will unfold, not with urgency, but with ease. The Persian Empire was, in many ways, a dream of connectedness, a world where a man in Lydia and a woman in Bactria could live under the same rule, exchange letters across thousands of miles, and worship different gods under a common peace. So let us begin this quiet conquest of memory and myth. Let us walk softly along the royal road. Let us gaze upward at stone reliefs worn by wind and time. Let us follow the warm glow of ancient fire temples and listen to the rhythms of a lost language. You don't need to remember every name or date. Let the story wash over you like a tide. Let it slow your breath. Let it soothe your thoughts. This is not just history, It is a space to rest, to wonder, and to dream. And now, let us begin. With the rise of Cyrus the Great. As the night deepens, we turn now to the soft beginnings of empire, where rugged hills cradle ancient tribes, and the seeds of greatness lie hidden in the soil of time. Before empires were carved from stone and sealed with royal seals, there were families, clans, and dynasties born of the land, and among them a lineage would rise, the Achaemenids. The name Achaemenid comes from a semi-legendary ancestor named Achaemenes, thought to have lived in the early 1st millennium BCE. We know little of him. He is a shadow behind the curtain of history, but his name would echo through the halls of Persepolis centuries later. His descendants, especially Perspex, his supposed grandson, began to unify various Persian clans in the southwestern region of Iran known as Perses, as the Greeks would later call it. This land, now modern-day Fars province, was cradled between the mountains and the Great Plains. The Persians were, in these early days, vassals of the Medes, another powerful Iranian people who dominated much of the Iranian plateau. The Medes had their own kingdom, centered in Ecbatana, and the Persians paid tribute to them until one young nobleman changed everything. That young man was Cyrus II, later known as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was born around 600 BCE to Cambyses I, a Persian king of modest power, and a Median princess named Mandane, linking him by blood to both peoples. He grew up in a world shaped by tribal loyalty, religious ritual, and looming imperial ambition. Zoroastrianism, the Persian religion attributed to the prophet Zarathustra, had already begun to shape the moral landscape. It taught of a cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, between light and darkness, a worldview that would later be mirrored in the very structure of the empire. By the mid-6th century BCE, Cyrus had taken the throne of the Persians, and soon after, in a swift and brilliant campaign, he revolted against his Median overlord, Astyages, who was both his grandfather and his rival. According to Herodotus, Astyages was betrayed by his own army, and Cyrus entered Ecbatana triumphantly, assuming control not just of Persia, but of the entire Median realm. This moment around 550 BCE marks the true birth of the Persian Empire. But Cyrus was no mere conqueror. He was a visionary who understood that the power of an empire lay not only in armies, but in administration, tolerance, and legitimacy. After conquering the Medes, Cyrus adopted many of their systems rather than dismantling them. He did not seek to erase his enemies, he absorbed them, weaving their traditions into the tapestry of his own authority. Over the next decade, Cyrus turned outward. His gaze fell westward to the wealthy kingdom of Lydia, ruled by the famously rich Croesus. The Lydians, based in what is now western Turkey, were known for their gold, their cavalry, and their oracles. The two kings met in battle near the Halys River, and though Croesus expected to win or at least regroup, Cyrus pursued him swiftly and took Sardis, the Lydian capital, by storm. With this victory, Cyrus gained control over Asia Minor, including Greek cities along the coast places like Ephesus, Miletus, and Smyrna. From Lydia, Cyrus turned his attention east and south. His campaigns extended into Bactria, Sogdia, and the vast eastern reaches of Central Asia. But perhaps his most famous conquest was that of Babylon. The Babylonian Empire, under Nabonidus, was a powerful but internally fractured realm. Its capital, Babylon, was a city of immense wealth, learning, and splendor. The city's massive walls and hanging gardens were the stuff of legend. But Nabonidus had alienated the priesthood, and his unpopular reforms left the people restless. In 539 BCE, Cyrus entered Babylon not with destruction, but with dignity. The city fell with little resistance. Cyrus presented himself not as a foreign invader, but as a liberator sent by the god Marduk, a careful political gesture. He respected local customs and religions. He famously allowed deported peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. This event is recorded both in the Cyrus Cylindera clay artifact, sometimes described as the world's first declaration of human rights, and in the Hebrew Bible, where Cyrus is honored as a righteous Gentile king. This approach to rule respectful, efficient, and inclusive became a cornerstone of the Persian imperial model. Let us pause here and breathe in the wonder of it. An empire not founded on terror, but on order. The Persians understood that power could endure only if it was seen as just. To rule over dozens of languages, gods, and traditions, one needed more than swords. One needed vision. Cyrus set about organizing his empire into provinces or satrapies, each governed by a satrapa-loyal administrator who answered directly to the king. These governors were often local elites, allowed to maintain their own customs while collecting taxes and upholding Persian law. It was a delicate balance of control and autonomy. Cyrus also invested in infrastructure. He built and maintained roads, most notably the Royal Road, a highway stretching over 1,500 miles from Susa to Sardis. Couriers on horseback could carry messages across the empire in mere days. Along these roads were way stations, inns, and guards. It was a marvel of logistical thinking. Yet Cyrus's reign ended, as all reigns must. In 530 BCE, during a campaign in the eastern frontier, perhaps against the Massagetæ, a nomadic people of Central Asia, Cyrus fell in battle. His body was returned to Pasargadae, where a simple but enduring tomb was built in his honor. Even Alexander the Great, 2 centuries later, would stand before it in reverence. Pasargadae itself became the first ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire, a place of gardens, palaces, and serene courtyards. In the silence of its stones, one can still feel the clarity of Cyrus's vision. No towering monuments of ego, no pompous inscriptions, only quiet grace, measured harmony, and enduring peace. As we reflect on Cyrus the Great, let his legacy lull us further into rest. He stands not only as a founder of empires, but as an architect of coexistence. He saw that empires, like dreams, are built not of conquest alone, but of understanding, patience, and care. And so, we drift from his footsteps into the next chapter, where another great builder rises. Darius the Great, who would shape the empire into a masterpiece of imperial design. As we move forward, still beneath the soft glow of history's quiet lantern, the scene shifts. Cyrus the Great has passed into memory, and a new figure now stands at the helm of the vast Persian realm, a man of precision, discipline, and vision. His name is Darius, known to posterity as Darius the Great. Let the air around you still, as if you're standing within a cool stone hall at dawn. The scent of incense drifts faintly in the air. Marble columns stretch upward toward carvings of winged lions and lotus flowers. This is the new heart of the Persian Empire that is no longer simply expanding, but being shaped, sculpted into permanence. Darius did not inherit the throne in a straightforward fashion. Upon the death of Cambyses, Cyrus's son, the empire briefly trembled with uncertainty. A usurper, claiming to be Cambyses' brother Bardia, seized power. Darius, then a young noble from a collateral branch of the royal family, moved decisively. In 522 BCE, he overthrew the impostor and declared himself king. Whether the usurper was truly Bardia or not remains one of history's open questions, but Darius's rise to power was swift and skillful. And once enthroned, Darius set about transforming the Persian Empire from a patchwork of conquests into a finely tuned instrument of governance. His first priority was stabilization. Across the empire, from Media to Babylonia, Egypt to Elam, rebellions flared. Darius quelled them all, more than 20 in total, demonstrating not just military prowess, but administrative foresight. He understood that an empire cannot run on conquest alone. It must be organized, documented, and communicated. To accomplish this, Darius reorganized the empire into 20 satrapies, or provinces. Each was governed by a satrap, but unlike under Cyrus, Darius introduced standardized tribute systems. Now, each province owed a fixed amount of silver or goods to the royal treasury, enabling better budgeting and oversight. These tributes were carefully recorded on tablets and scrolls, and royal inspectors called the King's Eyes and Ears traveled the empire to audit governors and report corruption. Darius also established a common currency, the daric, a gold coin stamped with the king's image. This currency, along with a silver counterpart called the siglos, allowed trade to flourish across thousands of miles. Merchants in Susa could accept the same coinage as those in Ephesus or Bactra. The economy, once dependent on bartering and local exchange, was now connected by royal seal. But Darius was more than a manager, he was a builder of vision. He founded a new ceremonial capital, Persepolis, literally the city of the Persians. It was not intended for everyday governance but for ritual, diplomacy, and symbolism. It was here, in this monumental complex, nestled against the cliffs of southern Iran, that the empire presented itself in stone. As we imagine Persepolis, picture wide terraces carved into the mountain upon which stood colossal halls with cedar roofs and stone walls adorned with carvings of tribute bearers. There were staircases flanked by scenes of subject peoples bringing gifts, Armenians with horses, Babylonians with textiles, Indians with gold dust, Ethiopians with ivory. Each group was carved in exquisite detail, not in scenes of submission, but of cooperation and empire of diversity under order. In the heart of Persepolis stood the Apadana, a grand audience hall with 72 columns. It could hold thousands. Foreign envoys would ascend a long staircase, pass through the gate of all nations, and approach the throne of the king, surrounded by quiet grandeur. All this set not in a city of noise and haste, but in the silence of the desert plateau. Darius also left his mark in other cities. In Susa, he rebuilt the royal palace in glazed brick and imported materials from across the empire, cedar from Lebanon, lapis from Afghanistan, gold from Lydia, and artisans from Egypt. This was a conscious message. The empire is not a tyranny, but a synthesis. His achievements were not merely physical. Darius understood the need for language and law. To administer such a vast empire, he established Aramaic as the official language of administration, even though Old Persian remained the language of royal inscriptions. Aramaic, already widely spoken across the Near East, allowed scribes from Egypt to India to communicate with the central government. Darius also commissioned the Behistun inscription, a monumental trilingual record carved into a cliffside in western Iran. Like the Rosetta Stone of Egypt, it featured the same text in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian. It tells the story of his rise to power and his victories over rebels, but also served as a symbol of imperial legitimacy and the triumph of order over chaos. Under his rule, the empire reached its peak, stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to Thrace and Macedonia in the west. This included Egypt, which Darius incorporated peacefully and ruled with deep respect for its traditions. He even completed construction on canals that connected the Nile to the Red Sea, fostering maritime trade between Africa and Asia. But no rule is without tension. Toward the end of his reign, Darius turned his gaze westward, across the Aegean Sea, toward the restless Greek city-states. The Ionian revolts, sparked by Greek cities under Persian rule, drew Darius into the complex and often volatile world of Greek politics. In 490 BCE, he launched an expedition against mainland Greece, seeking to punish Athens and Eretria for their support of the rebellion. The campaign culminated in the Battle of Marathon, where Athenian forces, against all odds, repelled the Persians. Though the loss did not significantly damage the empire, It marked the beginning of a long and storied conflict between East and West. Darius never returned to Greece. He died shortly after, in 486 BCE, and was buried in a rock-cut tomb at Naksh-e-Rostam, north of Persepolis. His tomb, carved high into the cliff, bears inscriptions proclaiming his achievements and his reverence for Ahura Mazda, the chief deity of Zoroastrianism. "I am Darius the Great King," it says, "King of kings, king of lands, king of this earth far and wide." And yet for all the majesty, we find in Darius not arrogance, but structure. His empire was not a display of personal grandeur, but a machine of governance, elegant, efficient, and vast. As we rest deeper into the story, let us consider the sound of scribes writing under oil lamps in Persepolis, the rhythmic beat of couriers riding the royal road, the quiet rustle of satraps counting coin, and the hush of tribute-bearers ascending palace stairs. This was the mind of the empire measured, clear, and vast. And as we drift onward, we enter the next reign marked by ambition, fire, and the shadows of war. The son of Darius would carry his father's torch into the heart of Greece. Now, as we glide further into the corridors of time, the torch once held by Darius the Great passes to his son. His name is Xerxes I, and with him comes a new chapter one of both splendor and strain, expansion and resistance. Let your breathing settle as we enter a world of ambition edged with uncertainty, a world where the Persian Empire brushes against the rugged shores of Greece. Xerxes was not merely the heir to an empire, he was the inheritor of a legacy. His father had laid the foundations of the world's most efficient state, and it was now Xerxes' task to maintain and expand it. When he came to power in 486 BCE, he was still relatively young. Darius had intended to lead a second campaign against the Greeks, but his death shifted that burden to Xerxes. Before turning his eyes west, however, Xerxes faced unrest within the empire. Egypt and Babylonia, two ancient lands with proud traditions, rose in revolt. Xerxes crushed both rebellions decisively, particularly in Babylon, where he removed the sacred statue of Marduk, decision some viewed as sacrilegious. These early years showed Xerxes to be a forceful and pragmatic ruler, unafraid to break with religious precedent to assert control. Once stability returned, he began preparing for the grand campaign that would define his reign. It was no small effort. Over the course of 4 years, he assembled the largest invasion force the ancient world had ever seen, hundreds of thousands of troops, fleets of ships, and logistical supplies stretching across continents. To connect Asia to Europe, Xerxes ordered the construction of 2 pontoon bridges across the Hellespont modern-day Dardanelles. When an early storm destroyed them, Xerxes, in a symbolic display of dominance, is said to have ordered the sea whipped with chains and cursed. Then he commanded that the bridges be rebuilt, stronger than before. This moment, both theatrical and authoritarian, captures the tension at the heart of his rule. Xerxes saw himself not merely as ruler of lands, but as master of elements and destiny. In 480 BCE, the Persian army began its march into Greece. Vast columns of infantry and cavalry, drawn from every corner of the empire, moved westward Medes, Elamites, Scythians, Indians, Ethiopians, and more. Herodotus, the Greek historian, may have exaggerated their number, but their diversity and magnitude were real. As the Persian forces entered Greece, the city-states were sharply divided. Many submitted, but a coalition led by Athens and Sparta chose resistance. And so, history unfolded at the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae. It was here that King Leonidas of Sparta, with a small force of Greek hoplites, stood against the Persian advance. For 3 days, the Greeks held their ground. Eventually, betrayed by a local who revealed a mountain path, the Persians outflanked them. Leonidas and his men fought to the death. Though a tactical defeat for the Greeks, Thermopylae became a symbol of courage, of defiance, and of the cost of resistance. Xerxes, meanwhile, pressed forward and reached Athens, which had been evacuated. His forces burned the city, destroying temples and homes, including the early Parthenon. For a moment, Persia stood victorious in Greece. But the victory was fragile. At Salamis, the Greek navy, using clever maneuvering and smaller, more agile ships, trapped the larger Persian fleet in narrow waters. Xerxes watched from a golden throne on the shore as his navy was decimated. Though he still held much of the Greek mainland, Xerxes sensed the tide turning. He returned to Persia, leaving a general, Mardonius, to continue the fight. The next year, at the Battle of Plataea, Mardonius was killed and Persian forces were decisively defeated. The Greco-Persian Wars did not collapse the Persian Empire, but they marked the limits of its western expansion. And in the centuries to come, this confrontation would be mythologized not just by the Greeks, but by the Western imagination as a contest between East and West, despotism and freedom, empire and democracy. The truth, of course, was far more nuanced. Xerxes returned to Persia, where he spent his later years completing the work of his father. At Persepolis, he oversaw the finishing touches on the Apadana and began construction of the Hall of 100 Columns, one of the largest roofed spaces in antiquity. He also embellished the palaces of Susa and Ecbatana, refining the imperial aesthetic elegant, serene, and symbolic. The art and architecture of this period offer a glimpse into the Persian worldview. Reliefs continued to show processions of tribute bearers, but they also featured scenes of the king in combat against lions, chaos beasts, and disorder. These were not just artistic flourishes, they were metaphors. The king as the bringer of cosmic balance, a concept central to Zoroastrianism, the empire's spiritual framework. Zoroastrianism, though never imposed as a state religion, deeply influenced Persian governance. Its central tenet, the battle between Asha, truth, order, and Druj, deceit, chaos, resonated with the empire's identity. The king, as Shahanshah, or King of Kings, was expected to uphold Asha through justice, mercy, and wise rule. Xerxes himself appears to have taken this responsibility seriously. In his inscriptions, he declares, "May Ahura Mazda protect this country from a hostile army, from drought, and from the lie." These were the three great threats: war, famine, and falsehood. Against them, the empire offered protection. But even great kings face mortal limits. In 465 BCE, Xerxes was assassinated in a court conspiracy, likely involving one of his own sons and court officials. His death marked the beginning of court intrigues and succession struggles that would trouble the later Achaemenid period. And yet, as we pause and breathe here, the Persian Empire remains not diminished, but resonant. The clash with Greece, the building of cities, the metaphysics of Zoroastrian dualism, these were not isolated moments. They were part of a wider, richer rhythm. So imagine, as your mind floats on the soft tides of history, the banners of Persia flickering in the morning sun, armies marching in disciplined cadence, scribes recording the deeds of kings, temples rising under starlight. The western frontier may have held, but the empire endures. Ahead lies the age of later kings rulers who will inherit this legacy and guard the fire of empire. Some will falter, one will fall. But the memory, the architecture, and the ambition will echo far beyond their lifetimes. As we drift gently into the next phase of our journey, the bright banners of Persian might still fly above the great capitals Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana. A subtle shift has begun. Power now rests in the hands of successors whose reigns, though marked by continuity, are increasingly tested by internal strife, fragile succession, and the flickering uncertainties of empire. When Artaxerxes Ison of Xerxes takes the throne in 465 BCE, he does so amid the shadow of his father's assassination. A court conspiracy led by the official Artabanus had not only slain the great king, but attempted to place a puppet on the throne. Artaxerxes swiftly reasserted control, executing the conspirators. His reign, though born in blood, would bring a measure of stability. Under Artaxerxes I, the empire consolidated its borders rather than expand them. The grand ambitions of Xerxes were replaced with quieter, more cautious governance. He supported infrastructure, patronized the arts, and made gestures toward religious tolerance, allowing, for instance, the Jews to rebuild Jerusalem's walls under Nehemiah. These acts spoke not to weakness, but to a maturing imperial philosophy: rule not just through fear, but through presence. Still, the cracks in the imperial structure had begun to form. The satrapies, those provinces overseen by noble governors, grew increasingly powerful and independent. In Egypt, revolts flared again. In Asia Minor, the Greek cities began to test the limits of Persian authority, emboldened by the support of Athens. Though Persian forces often prevailed, the cost of these endless border skirmishes was subtle erosion of energy, of unity, of time. As we glide into the reigns of Artaxerxes II and Artaxerxes III in the 4th century BCE, the rhythm of the empire changes. It becomes more reactive, more defensive. Court politics grow intricate. Royal families fracture into factions. Brothers turn against brothers, generals turn against kings, and the imperial throne becomes a delicate seat perched atop ambition. Artaxerxes II, who ruled from 404 to 358 BCE, faced one of the greatest internal threats in Persian history, a rebellion led by his own brother, Cyrus the Younger. In a bold and desperate attempt to seize the throne, Cyrus marshaled a force that included 10,000 Greek mercenaries, a foreshadowing of the cultural and military collision yet to come. At the Battle of Cunaxa, Cyrus was killed, but the Greeks under Xenophon managed to retreat across the empire, recording their journey in the classic work Anabasis. This event sent a powerful message across the Greek world. The Persian Empire, though vast, was not impenetrable. The kings that followed faced constant tension, keeping satraps loyal, managing Egypt's resistance, and watching the westward horizon where Greek city-states stirred in restless disunity. Under Artaxerxes III, the empire saw a flicker of regained strength. He ruled from 358 to 338 BCE and was a formidable presence, strong-willed, ruthless, and energetic. He reconquered Egypt in a brutal campaign and tightened control over rebellious satrapies. Yet his reign ended once again in conspiracy. He was poisoned by his court official Bagoas, who installed the next king, Artaxerxes IV, soon murdered by the same hand. These are not just names or dates. They are echoes of instability, moments that softened the empire's once impenetrable armor. The final ruler of the Achaemenid dynasty, Darius III, came to power in 336 BCE. He was capable but not exceptional. The court remained a nest of scheming nobles. Provincial governors held their own armies. Loyalty was a coin traded carefully. And across the Aegean Sea, a new force had emerged, unified, hungry, and lightning fast. Macedon. The Macedonians, once peripheral, now surged under a brilliant young King Alexander. His father, Philip II, had already unified the Greek city-states. And now, Alexander turned his gaze eastward. The time had come when the empires of past and future would collide. Darius III tried to rally the empire. He assembled armies, fortified key positions, and attempted to sway key satraps to his side. But Alexander's campaign would prove unlike anything Persia had ever faced. He did not merely raid or plunder, he sought to conquer and assimilate. At Granicus, Issus, and finally Gaugamela, Darius was defeated, not for lack of courage, but by the brilliance of Alexander's tactics and the disunity within Persian command. Darius fled eastward, hoping to regroup. But the end was near. In 330 BCE, as Alexander approached the heart of the empire, Darius was betrayed by one of his own governors, Bessus, who had him arrested and later murdered. Darius died not on the battlefield, but in captivity, abandoned by the very satraps who once owed him loyalty. Alexander would mourn him publicly, sending his body to Persepolis for a royal burial. It was not only a gesture of respect, but a signal. The age of Achaemenid Persia had ended, but its memory would continue, even under new masters. So we breathe, deeply and slowly, and picture the empire in its final twilight. The royal roads stretch empty beneath the fading sun. In Persepolis, the golden halls still glow, but the banners have changed. The fire temples burn low. The scribes close their scrolls. Yet even in decline, Persia remains dignified. The empire did not vanish in a single moment. Its systems, languages, religions, and cities would shape the world that followed. Alexander would adopt many Persian customs. His successors, the Seleucids, the Parthians, the Sassanids, would inherit and reinterpret the Persian model. The Achaemenid legacy is not defined by its fall, but by its endurance. Now, as you drift gently between thought and sleep, let your mind wander through the great halls of Darius and Xerxes, past moonlit courtyards, along tiled walls and fragrant gardens. The story has not ended. It is simply changing form like the wind that carries sand across the desert, erasing footprints but not the memory of those who passed. As the grand deeds of kings and conquerors fade softly into the background, let us now turn our attention to the gentle rhythm of everyday life within the Persian Empire. This chapter unfolds not in royal courts or on distant battlefields, but in village squares, caravanserais, workshops, and temples where the empire truly breathed and thrived. Close your eyes and picture the empire at its height under Darius I. From the lush valleys of the Tigris to the mountain passes of Media, from the Nile to the Indus, a mosaic of languages, cultures, and peoples moved under the same imperial canopy. This was not a uniform world, but a harmonized own stitched together by roads, trade, ritual, and law. Let us begin with the Royal Road, one of the most remarkable achievements of Persian infrastructure. It stretched over 2,700 kilometers from Sardis in Asia Minor to Susa near the Persian Gulf. Couriers rode horses from station to station, changing mounts at rest posts every few leagues. In just over a week, a message could travel across what would take an ordinary traveler 3 months to walk. Along this road, the empire pulsed with life. Merchants guided caravans bearing spices from India, lapis lazuli from Bactria, linen from Egypt, and olive oil from Greece. Tax collectors and imperial inspectors moved from province to province, recording inventories and observing governors. Priests, scholars, and pilgrims journeyed to sacred fires and ziggurats. In the space of a single day, a traveler might hear 5 different languages, see 3 different styles of dress, and exchange coins bearing the mark of the King of Kings. In the cities, Persepolis, Susa, Babylon, Ecbatana, quieter life unfolded with graceful complexity. Bakers rose before dawn, filling the air with the scent of barley bread and honey cakes. Potters turned wheels in courtyards shaded by fig trees. Scribes copied administrative texts in Old Persian, Elamite, Aramaic, or Akkadian, depending on the region and purpose. Children played in dusty alleys with balls made of leather and twine. At home, the Persian day followed a familiar rhythm. Most lived in mud brick houses with a central courtyard for cooking, gathering, and tending small gardens. Wealthier Persians had painted walls, stone floors, and storage rooms lined with amphorae of wine and oil. Meals were often simple: flatbread, lentils, yogurt, dates, nuts, and occasionally fish or lamb seasoned with herbs. Persians were known for their cleanliness and ritual purity. Baths were common, and priests followed strict codes of washing and dress. Religion permeated every aspect of life. The dominant faith was Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zarathustra, whose teachings emphasized cosmic dualism, the ongoing struggle between Ahura Mazda, the force of truth and light, and Angra Mainyu, the force of deception and darkness. In fire temples, eternal flames burned as symbols of purity and divine presence. Worshippers prayed facing the sun, chanted hymns from the Avesta, Zoroastrian scripture, and offered incense and ghee. But the empire was not doctrinaire. It respected religious diversity. Babylonians still honored Marduk. Jews rebuilt temples. Egyptians prayed to Isis and Osiris. This ecumenical approach became a pillar of Persian stability. Time in the empire was measured not just by clocks or calendars, but by festivals. The most beloved was Nowruz, the Persian New Year, celebrated at the spring equinox. Homes were cleaned, fires lit, and families gathered to feast, exchange gifts, and plant new crops. It was a celebration of rebirth, light, and continuity, echoing the eternal flame that defined Zoroastrian ritual. The Persian legal system was relatively fair and structured. While the king held supreme authority, local governors, called satraps, managed justice within their provinces. Courts heard disputes over land, debt, theft, and family matters. Penalties were harsh for major crimes, but often lenient for minor offenses. Women could own property, engage in business, and inherit wealth privileges not always available in neighboring cultures. And then there were the artisans, the weavers, metalworkers, glassmakers, and jewelers who gave Persian life its aesthetic richness. Goldsmiths crafted intricate necklaces and earrings. Embroiderers adorned garments with floral and geometric designs. Stone carvers etched scenes of royal processions and mythic animals, winged lions, griffins, bulls with human faces. Even the walls of Persepolis were alive with bas-reliefs, showing courtiers from distant lands bringing tribute, camels, ivory, spices, rare birds. In rural areas, life followed the harvest cycle. Farmers plowed with oxen, planted wheat and barley, and irrigated fields using ancient canals. Shepherds guided flocks across the Zagros foothills. Children gathered pomegranates and almonds. In the evenings, stories were shared under star-filled sky stales of Cyrus the Great, the magic of Ahura Mazda, or fables of ancient kings and the sun's journey. The Persian Empire was not merely a collection of laws or roads, it was a civilization of texture and tone, of values and rhythms. It brought together the practical and the spiritual, the mighty and the humble. It offered protection without forced assimilation, unity without uniformity. Let us pause, gently, and imagine the sounds of that world. The clang of bronze bells at a caravan gate, the whispered prayers before a sacred flame, the splash of water in a marble basin, the low hum of market haggling, the creak of wooden carts over stone roads, the faint music of a stringed santur in a palace garden. All of it, part of a living mosaic, flickering now in your mind as a gentle warmth. As we move slowly toward the final chapter, let this moment settle. The empires we study are not built only by generals and kings, but by farmers who rose with the sun, artisans who shaped the beauty of the everyday, and mothers who taught children their first prayers. To understand Persia is not only to trace the arc of conquest, but to listen for the heartbeat of daily life, soft, regular, and enduring. As the twilight deepens across the centuries, and the sounds of markets, temples, and royal courts grow faint, we arrive at the final chapter of our journey. We drift now not forward, but outward into the echoes of the Persian Empire, the long afterglow that shaped worlds to come. The Persian Empire, though eventually absorbed by Alexander the Great and later by the Roman and Islamic worlds, did not vanish. It transformed, translated, and transmitted, passing its ideas like seeds on the wind. And many of those seeds would take root far beyond the lands of Persepolis. Let us begin with governance. The Persian satrapy system, where a central authority delegated power to local rulers, became a blueprint for future empires. The Romans, Byzantines, and later Islamic caliphates adopted versions of this structure, balancing central power with regional autonomy. Even modern federal systems echo this ancient principle: unity without erasure of difference. The royal road and the courier system built along it set a precedent for the Roman cursus publicus, the Ottoman postal relays, and even the 19th century Pony Express. The idea of rapid communication across vast distances was born, in part, from the Persian genius for integration without fragmentation. In language and administration, Aramaic, chosen by the Achaemenids as a unifying administrative tongue, continued long after the empire's fall. It became the lingua franca of trade and diplomacy from Egypt to Central Asia, influencing languages and alphabets across the Near East. And in law, the Persians gave us something quiet but profound: the idea that an empire could uphold diverse customs under a shared umbrella of fairness. Darius I inscribed in stone, "I am not unjust to the weak, nor do I tolerate oppression." His insistence on order, justice, and accountability became a legacy not of conquest, but of governance with conscience. Now let us drift toward culture and spirit. Zoroastrianism, the religion of the Achaemenids, deeply influenced later Abrahamic traditions. The concepts of a singular God, a cosmic battle between good and evil, the coming of a Messiah, final judgment, heaven and hell, these threads, which became central to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have roots in Persian religious thought. Even now, the eternal flame of Zoroastrianism still burns in temples in Iran and India, tended by the descendants of ancient priests, carrying a flame that has endured for over 2,500 years. Architecturally, the grandeur of Persepolis left a deep impression on later empires. The arches, columns, and courtyards of Persian palaces influenced Greco-Roman buildings and later Islamic design. The idea of empire as a sacred space, a city built to reflect divine order, shaped how civilizations would plan capitals from Rome to Constantinople, from Baghdad to Isfahan. In art and textiles, Persian motifs, geometric patterns, floral arabesques, winged beasts spread along trade routes and appeared in Byzantine mosaics, Mughal palaces, and Renaissance tapestries. The Persian carpet, an art form that combines geometry, narrative, and nature, became a global symbol of craftsmanship and elegance. Even in storytelling, the legacy endured. Persian epics like the Shahnameh, written centuries later, drew on memories of Achaemenid grandeur. In Greek accounts, Cyrus the Great became a paragon of the wise ruler. In Jewish texts, he is honored as the liberator who allowed the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. In modern times, he is sometimes called the first champion of human rights for his cylinder proclaiming tolerance and liberty. Persia's idea of power was not merely force, but majesty, a majesty rooted in order, beauty, justice, and harmony. Even as empires rose and fell, Alexander's whirlwind conquest, the Parthians' horse-archer state, the Sassanids' revival and ultimate fall to Islam, the memory of the Achaemenids lingered, like a perfume in the stone. It inspired poets, architects, lawmakers, and rebels alike. The ruins of Persepolis became not just a monument, but a metaphor for something vast, intricate, and enduring. As we near the end of our journey, let us return to where we began. Close your eyes and picture that ancient road once more. The royal road winding through golden hills and mountain passes, past olive groves and sacred fires, beneath the stars of a Near Eastern sky. On that road, history walks alongside myth. A merchant from Sardis, a priest from Babylon, a general from Bactria, a child from Susathe, all move beneath the same imperial banner, speaking different tongues but sharing the same sun. And above them, on a high plateau in Persepolis, the King of Kings receives envoys from the ends of the earth, not as conqueror alone, but as steward of a world woven from many threads. The Persian Empire was not perfect. It knew war, ambition, and decline, but it also knew something rare: the strength of mercy, the value of diversity, and the dignity of law. In that spirit, it whispers still. It whispers through the pillars of ruined halls, through the chant of prayers passed from elder to child, through the curves of a carpet, through the quiet architecture of justice. And now, as you lie back and let the stillness of night settle upon you, let those whispers become soft waves, carrying you gently into sleep. You have journeyed through millennia, through the deserts of Iran and the halls of kings, through sacred flames and stone inscriptions, through time itself. And now, it is time to rest. May your dreams carry you through golden fields and royal roads. May the wisdom of the ancients guard your sleep, and may the legacy of Persia echo softly, like a gentle wind through cypress trees, beneath a velvet sky of stars. Good night.